Welcome, everyone, to our sweaty little podcast.
Sweaty? Speak for yourself.
Blasting anabolism out of the high desert of Boise, Idaho. Anabolic tornado. Nick Coleus, some kind of editorial creature here at Bodybuilding.com. To my left, as always, as ever, is Chrissy Kendall, editor of Science.
All science.
Do you edit Science?
Can you even edit?
Are you allowed to edit Science, or is Science just, it comes out perfectly
Do
boring?
you even science?
Yeah.
We've also got Cassie Smith, another BB.com lifer, created in a test tube to crush wads.
For real.
Got a baby that's straight up walking at 7 months old. Cruel and unusual parenting. Not so keen on spiders, though, I learned yesterday.
That thing was gross.
Oh, it had a face on it, like with a mustache. I think I saw a mustache.
But you know, some people, I posted a picture of a spider, cool looking spider on Instagram.
Hairy and disgusting.
Yeah.
Had a face on its back. Most people, if they have a problem with it, they would mention it in the comments. You know, I mean, of course, I don't have comments on mine because nobody follows me. But
I texted.
but Cassie, she doesn't hit the comments. She straight up text messages me and says, and I quote, "Is that a fucking spider? Where are you? Why does that even exist?" I think she thought I was stuck in the web.
Yeah.
Like the spider had captured me.
The spider actually posted to
exactly.
Instagram. Like,
No,
I took
did.
over.
I did, like,
yeah.
save me Instagram, save me celebrities of Instagram. We have 4 at the table today, actually. We've also got Abbie Smith-Ryan. She's got a baby as well. I've got a baby.
No, I don't.
Oh, yeah, I
I
forgot
have
about
a
your
baby.
babies.
Yeah, I was here for babies. No, we don't need to talk about
I'm
babies.
man out
Chrissy.
today.
But she's also got a Ph.D. She's got the CSD, the kissing, all the letters. But more to the point,
Next time is caffeine.
I know. Yeah.
she's also an assistant professor at UNC Chapel Hill, where, in the words of our nutrition editor, Paul Salter, she crushes the DEXAs.
Oh.
That's what he told me. I said, "Do you know her?" And he said, "I don't really know all that well, but I know she crushes the DEXAs."
Wow.
Good to know.
That's something to put on the name tag
DEXA
right
crusher.
there. Yeah.
Put that on my CV.
Add it to the signature line.
Also, an author, co-author on dozens of papers. I don't know.
Nobody reads them anyway.
There's 4 of us.
Yeah.
They just want those body fat scans.
Yep.
That's all they want to know. Except they don't really want a DEXA, right?
No.
Because a DEXA will tell you how wrong you've been about your body fat level.
Yeah, and how
that's what-
fat you really are.
like your soul.
Yeah, it's like, let's not see it.
Today, I don't know what exactly we'll be talking about. If what's happened so far is any indication, I'm figuring body comp and body fat and strength and nutrition for women, and those other jerks too.
Yeah, occasionally.
They're important
talk about
too.
men.
you know?
Are they?
They make babies.
That's yeah.
They assist.
Yes. True that.
You ever done a DEXA scan on a baby?
Oh, there's some.
Bod pods. The
Pea pod, yeah.
Pea pod.
Wait,
They
why
have-
would you-
They have
why?
bod pods for babies.
Yeah.
For like fat babies?
No, to see, like, check
Or if they're
obesity
much-
rates of children. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Aren't they
We
supposed to be
actually-
obese babies?
Well, no, like when we had one of our close friends.
She works at Kansas Medical Center now.
And when she was pregnant with her first, she was getting bod pods throughout her pregnancy. So they were looking at her body composition. And then when her baby girl Chandler was born, for a period of time, they would both do it. And so it's this pea pod is what they call it, instead of the bod pod. But they wrap them very tight so that they can't move. And then they do measurements that way. But yeah, I mean,
so
it's
it's
not
a
like
womb
they're...
and a womb and a
Yeah,
womb.
yeah, they're not really like competition lean, but I'm sure they could work on it if they wanted to.
Well, it's tracking what happens with the mom, right?
Yep.
And how that impacts obesity, like, in the child. Which
Yeah,
is pretty
it's
cool.
really cool.
But those aren't the kind of DEXAs you've been
No,
crushing.
I do. We actually had to get a bigger DEXA to fit the very large individuals. It was the weight limit of 350 was not large enough.
For football players? Or?
We see a lot of retired NFL athletes, and then a lot of athletes, and then just normal overweight obese people too.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
So
450 is our limit now.
450.
Big person.
Yeah.
Okay, so like how many DEXA scans do you think you've done?
Oh.
hundreds.
Yeah, like at least 1,000.
Really?
Yeah, way more than that.
Okay, so yeah, I imagine just having that volume to look at, you have a different perspective on body fat than somebody who's
Yeah, if
just
you
like,
take your shirt off, I probably
I was
could
gonna
tell
say,
you.
Visual identification. No, but the cool thing too about DEXAs and looking at the different body sizes.
you tell from my wrist.
Yeah.
Let me
the
feel it.
swole ass wrist right there.
See, like in relation to their skeleton too, like where they hold all the fat and the disproportion of it. Like it's so cool to even just pass. Okay, so you get a percentage, which is great, but all of the other data you can get from a DEXA is really, really interesting
Right, there's
stuff.
bone information too, right?
And muscle, we do a lot with like injury prevention or like post-injury, looking at muscle imbalances and return to play. And we actually published a really interesting paper on gymnastics and spine curvature, and even high jumpers. So like all torsional rotation athletes have a spinal curve, or most of them, and they don't know about it. And so knowing that, you can kind of tweak their training to be more unilateral or kind of fix imbalances.
It makes me think, like, you go to a gym, you sign up for a little transformation program. They'll give you the calipers or the electrodes or something like that early on. If there's a DEXA in every town, if somebody went and got a DEXA scan instead, just a normal person, what extra value would that provide to them? Just for their, I'm not quite sure what my goal is. I think I want to lose, my spare tire, sort of.
The best thing is it's a 3-compartment model, so it does give you, it's a little bit more accurate for muscle. So I would say it would be more advantageous if they were to do it like a tracking changes type of thing. And it's less influenced by like water and exercise, whereas like skin folds and total body water, the stickers
And
are.
you don't have to strip down. You can go. That's always been a benefit.
Yeah.
You can go in sweats or whatnot. So
Can you just go to your local BSU, your local college, and be like, hey, DEXA me?
Or
Some of them will.
could you tell us how to operate the machinery ourselves if we snuck in after hours?
Okay, maybe I've tried to do that before.
you have to do. We've gone through. Abbie and I have gone through extensive training for radiation. We've learned about the history of radiation to use a DEXA, and then you have to go through certification through DEXA to get. So it's a little bit harder, I would say, than some of the other forms.
In some states, you actually have to have an MD and or like an actual technician.
Yeah.
It depends on the state. So it's not
Okay,
that
Bodybuilding.com insurance
No,
probably.
probably
doesn't-
not
not going to
covering
cover
it.
it. Yeah.
But I mean, as we mentioned earlier, you kind of don't want to know the answer necessarily, right? If you're one of those internet ripped people, you're like, oh, bro, you're so 12%. Oh, you're so 7. How different is the number, a DEXA number, versus those internet ideas of what a certain level?
It's very, very different, even between DEXA devices. But I will say it's really nice, like post-baby, I wanted to track my body composition, and it was really, really interesting to see even like where you store your fat. So DEXA, our new DEXA tracks visceral fat and abdominal fat. And so like it's really good at tracking lean mass too. And so I got to a point where I was like, fuck, I can't lose any weight. And I was like, okay, let's, wrap your head around this. Let's get on the DEXA. And I'd gained like 5 pounds of lean mass. So even though I couldn't get my weight down. So it's good to like put things in perspective.
So just on that topic, because I think post-pregnancy weight is a big deal for fitness-minded individuals.
Scary.
It is. And so to see what your body looked like before, so again, just quick background, collegiate athlete, has done a figure show before. So you're one who definitely came from on the leaner side prior to having your baby.
We can always be a little leaner, right?
Right. And then you have a baby, and Cassie, the same thing, just being an athletic individual prior to, but then the pressure and the expectations that you put on yourself and that other people put on you. When do you feel it's a good time to start going back to, okay, I'm going to try to get back to what I was pre-pregnancy?
Or is it possible?
Yeah,
did you look at your
never
DEXA
be
and
the
go,
same.
I'm different now?
Yeah, and that's okay. It's okay that I'm never going to be like, I'm
But
fascinated
you hear women
by
say
this.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good question, Cassie. You might have different perspective. I think like your body will always be different. You had a child, right? But I think if you do it right, if you exercise throughout, I told this to Chrissy. I view birth as an athletic event, right? If you like train and eat like you were competing, your body responds how it should. And then even after the fact, like I nursed until I think he was 13 months, 12 months. And so that has a big impact too of how you want to manipulate things. But there's a lot of things you can do. So I definitely got back to where I was. But, you know, like your body serves a different purpose, you know? So I think you have to figure out what your goals are. And it can't be vanity, right? Like I wanted to get where I needed to be so that I could be a good mom and, you know, be fertile again. And you know what I mean? So, and a lot of injury prevention stuff too. Like you want to get your core tight and your, you know, your nether regions tight.
Oh, undercarriage.
So when I do hit on a treadmill, I don't walk off with wet
leaking
pants.
oil.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's some underlying motivation, you know, like you can be skinny and lose a bunch of weight, but you lose lean mass. So like doing it slow and steady there's definitely a way to do it.
You mentioned a really interesting idea in there, too, of training for birth like it's an athletic
love
event.
that
I like
idea.
That. My wife totally did that, and it made such a huge difference because it's like a battle for your life. I mean, I think Cassie can understand, having
gonna
gone
say
through the
Cassie,
CrossFit
too.
Games before giving birth.
Yeah.
Just like a
While
day or two
pregnant,
before
yeah.
giving birth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's rough. It's way rough. No, and it's interesting what you're saying. For me, it's been a weird battle. It was a weird identity battle for me when I was pregnant because I was like my identity was to be like an elite athlete, and then when I was pregnant, like my identity turned into pregnant person, and that just like was crazy for my mind. And then post pregnancy, I was like, what am I now? Like just mom, or can I ever be back to elite
Well, and then instantly we all are asking, are you going to compete in the next games, Cassie? When are you doing? When's your next
I
competition?
did not ask that question.
Maybe hinted at it.
So maybe hinted.
No, everybody else asked plenty.
Yeah.
So that was probably the hardest part for me. It was like wrapping my mind around like who I am. That's really deep or whatever, but that was the hardest part I think for me for pregnancy and like my career as an athlete and what it will turn into, if it will ever be the same. And I'm still trying to figure that out, and I don't know. I hope so.
Is that something that you've encountered in DEXA scans where maybe just what
Is their brain like a little sad
No.
face?
I'm saying that maybe a woman's body is just kind of different afterwards. Like, I know, I'm speaking totally anecdotally. I know women who say that. Like, it's so much harder for me after I had this one baby. Is there any real info to back that up?
It'll
Or is
never
it
be the
just because
same.
the lifestyle
Yeah.
is different, and
Is
where
that-
before
yeah, exactly.
I could go
Or is it
2
the
hours
lifestyle?
to the gym and I had to prep food for myself.
Yes.
Now I have to take care of a baby, and then also if I'm breastfeeding or doing that, I need to make sure I'm taking in enough nutrients and stuff. Whereas before I could do like a 1,500 calorie cut for 4 weeks. Like, you can't do that.
Yeah, for sure. Like, so I think most of it's lifestyle. And now I will say, like, some women, every pregnancy is different, right? So, like, if you gain a lot of weight really fast, like, stretch marks sometimes never go away. But I think exercise has a big impact on that. And two, I think some women's hips, like, they never are the same gene size, but that doesn't mean you can't be the same leanness, So there are a few things. But honestly, I think it goes back to lifestyle. Like, you have to be more strategic with your training. And one thing I think about too is I always incorporate my son with what I'm doing. So we like have a bike and we'll go do intervals on that. And when he was little, I'd like sit him next to the treadmill and do intervals. And now he like loves, like being involved in activity. I think teaching them young is important too. And so not only are you, sometimes as women, I think we forget to do self-care and like that's our time, and so like incorporating your children make you more strategic and doing more high intensity, like get it done, opposed to like let me drink at the drinking fountain in between each set, so like just being more purposeful.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point because it can be very easy to say, oh, where was I going with that? but it can be easy to look at birth as a challenge to fitness. But at the same time, I'm sure there are many women who just see that wake up call at the same time, like, you know what, actually there is a purpose to this now. And just the fact that I have so many fewer hours all of a sudden makes me, a little bit more intense and a little bit more efficient, a little more driven to get it done.
Yeah.
Gives you more energy, like it really in the overall like has a huge impact.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like you said, and never having been pregnant, I don't have a baby, but just knowing that in general, when we give fitness and nutrition advice, not one person is going to be the same and not one person is going to respond the same. And so pre-post pregnancy, you cannot compare or expect yourself to respond in the same way. And sometimes just listening to your body, and being around and having seen Cassie and talked to her post pregnancy, and when certain lifts just didn't feel good, it was like, I'm just not going to do them today. And then when it felt good to go up in weight, okay, I went up in weight today. And, I'm not at a PR yet, but I'm getting close there, and just not rushing the whole thing. And I think part of that's just your perspective. It's like, why do I even need to? Like, what am I trying to prove? I've just created this beautiful life. Like, I think that's, important enough right now. Yeah. So just, I think, outlook on it too.
Right, but your sport is also, it's a performance-oriented sport. Yes. Like you have that goal.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about my abs showing as much as I want them to. Like, that's, for me, like for weightlifting, I just have to be a certain weight. So that's been really nice. I don't have to necessarily worry about body composition, but just like my weight.
Yeah.
That takes a load off.
I want to return to body fat for a second too, because it's something that we see a lot. If you walk down the hallways in Bodybuilding.com, there are those posters.
Yeah, I showed her.
There are people's body fat right next to their name, like that's part of their fitness calling card. And something that Cassie and I in the past have had conversations about is what the lowest healthy level is for a woman, or not only the lowest healthy level, but the lowest responsible level to put out there. We see pictures all the time of a woman. She says, "Oh, I'm 9%." And we think, okay, is 9% possible for a woman? Is it healthy for a woman? Is it advisable for a woman?
Non-competitor.
Should we be telling people, hey, this is what you should be at?
Right. You yourself said, you can always lose a little bit more fat.
Well, I think it's funny, too, because we all have our own set point. And I'll just give you kind of a quick story. So when I was in college, I ran, and we would get our body fat like every couple weeks, which is ridiculous, right? But I had 9 stress fractures, and every time I would get a stress fracture, it was when my body fat got below 15%. And that's not that low. I mean, it's low, but
for female athletes, and you were a runner.
There's that male versus female body fat thing that's in this as well. But continue.
And so, like, a lot of other runners could get lower, but for me, it was not healthy. Like, I couldn't get lower than that, and so I knew I needed to be more like 15-16%. And so for women, the lowest you'll ever see is really like 9 or 10%. I would never see that on a DEXA. The lowest I've ever seen a female on a DEXA, I think, is like 16%.
Which, not to cut you off, but you bring up a good point, and sometimes I get questions about different methods of body comp and how sometimes people, it's kind of like the spectrum, and sometimes the leaner you are, it may overestimate you. The more fat you have, it actually has a tendency to underestimate you. So DEXA, and it can do that.
It's not perfect.
No. Well, so sometimes for lean people, will always overestimate what their actual body fat is because of just inherent error with the...
Which at the end of the day, who the hell cares?
Right.
But it's more about, and I'll say this till
YouTube
I'm blue
cares.
in the face.
Yes.
Well, they need to find something else to care about. Right? Like,
People are dying in Africa. Hurricane. Global warming.
Well, so what's the lowest number you've ever seen in a DEXA scan for a man then?
I think the lowest I've ever seen is 9% on a DEXA for
really?
a man.
Oh gosh, we have people around here who are swearing that they're 3%.
No,
man.
not happening. No, And because like the DEXA, they actually assumes like how dense your brain and head is, like if you have a fat head, and no, it just assumes some of those things, and like your bones and organs, it's more accurate. And so like if you think about even assuming some of the density of those tissues, like some of them look more like fat than others, and so like your brain, the density is more closely related to fat than it is muscle, some of those things. And so, and if you think about some just essential fat, when you look at that and what's published, they'll say like men 2 to 3%, and so like with a bod pod, I've seen like a 1 to 2% value, but I don't know if I believe that, right? And so it's just error within a device. And it goes back to tracking changes. At the end of the day, we want to see if whatever we're doing is working, or, are we, what's the change, not just in weight, but composition. That I think has more health implications. Overall body fat, unless you're talking about, like visceral fat, which is where, has more health consequences, or overweight, obesity, some of those things, it makes a difference on kind of general fat. But most devices have like a plus or minus 4% error, which is huge. That means you could be, 20% one day, 25% the next day, and 16% the next day.
Which is why you don't do body comp every day.
No, or every
tell
month.
people that.
Yeah.
don't expect changes, and then they get so upset
Or like
and
over
down
like
on
0.5%, and they're psyched. I'm like,
yeah,
whoa,
and like that's within the air of that piece of equipment, and trying to explain that to people, and they don't want to hear it. Everyone is so fixated on a number, and it doesn't care. They don't care about performance necessarily, how their body's actually functioning, but it's that stupid number with a percentage sign next to it, and that's all we care about. It's it's interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing here is that maybe in the pantheon of performance markers, body fat shouldn't be quite as high as people assign it value-wise. I've read online where you said, body, living, dying by the scale also is not the way to go. Where did these belong in the order of importance? With strength and how you feel, and
that's a good. I mean, I think you should incorporate everything, right? And at the end of the day, sometimes it's how your pants fit, right? So I think it has a big impact. And I would say you shouldn't live or die by anything, right? And it's really looking at, well, what are your goals? And I would argue if your goal is to put on lean mass, well, who cares what the scale says, right? And maybe you want to get, even who really cares what fat mass says, because you're bound to gain some fat if you're trying to put on muscle, like to some extent. So it's really figuring out what your goals are. And maybe your goal is total strength. And who cares about weight and, percent fat?
Yeah. Assuming that, they don't get carried away with it.
Right.
Like, I'll just eat cake and, because it's strength. I'm working on strength. So
it was interesting that you said you found there's a certain level of body fat where below that your bones were actually getting symptomatic.
Yep.
A woman who has a number in her mind or who has just fat loss in her mind, if the numbers aren't really a good guide for her, what is?
Yeah.
How do you know when
great.
you're getting too low?
Yeah.
Because there are women around here that sometimes we go, I think she's getting a little too low.
Yeah, there's a couple things. So we actually use, I use DEXA a lot to calculate what we call ideal body weight. And so like a woman might come to me and say, I want to lose 30 pounds, right? And we'll do her body comp. And when you actually look at it, she can't lose 30 pounds. Otherwise, you're going to lose the lean mass. So there are some good calculations you can do. And then there's other things that like you can tell if you're too low in essential body fat. Your hair falls out. Your skin is really dry. You have no glow. You lose menstruation, for women.
Hormones are affected by that.
Huge impact. And like overall fatigue, but like early symptoms, like you can tell if a female is too low. Like she looks dry and like, just not full and
like
happy.
A hollow face
and,
type of, like you can see it. Yeah.
And, hair falls out. That's like a really easy symptom. And so, but that's different for everybody, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is there something? Is there a level that you can think where it starts to impair athletic performance?
Depends on the sport, But yeah, I mean, if you get too low, lots of injuries happen. But I think, I guess, again, it really depends. But most female athletes, I would say, fall between 15 to 18% in general.
What would you say for general population, fitness-minded, so not a competitive athlete, but someone who does work out 5 days a week? Because that would obviously be a little bit different than we would say a general population. That would be I train or I do moderate activity 3 times a week. Is there what kind of ranges? Because I still think people are really distorted when I say, she's 23% body fat, and they're like, she's overweight.
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah, I would say the lowest I would ever want like an average fitness goer to be, like 18% is pretty low and for a female. And so I would say probably, depending on their age, obviously as you get older, you have a little bit more leeway. But like 25%, I would probably say is kind of like the cut point. You want to be less than between 18 and 25% is kind of like a pretty lean individual.
Yeah.
For women. For men, I think it depends. There's so much more variability with men. Damn men, they can lose fat. No boobs and no hips, right?
No brains either. Big fatty
Really
brain.
no fat at all.
So it'd be a little bit lower. I mean, obviously, I've actually seen some pretty fit guys at like 18%, which is maybe on the upper end. So I would say maybe like 14 to 18%. I don't know. What would you say in the low end? Maybe 12%.
I was going to say 12, but still just not
and it depends
fair.
on how you're measuring.
Yeah. So speaking kind of just now that we've brought men into the picture,
They're always in a picture somewhere.
Well, I block them out.
I blocked them on
So do
Instagram.
Yeah. I block them on Instagram all the time.
He's only saying that because there's 3 women next to him.
I know. But I think there's a lot of interesting points to be made and just a discussion in general that we hear a lot on things where men and women might respond differently. Is that as far as fitness, okay, so exercise, the way we train and how we lose weight, is there really that big of a difference how men and women would respond to a similar training program? Or are we just, as women, kind of using that as an excuse? Well, I'm a woman and my hormones, I have too much estrogen, so I will never lose this weight. Or, I can't do this type of lifting because I'm a woman and I'm going to get bulky. I just feel like we constantly compare, and I think a lot of times assume that we are too different to see similar results if we try to give common advice. Mm-hmm. So any examples where you say, yes, no, actually men and women respond differently to this, or no, it's kind of the same?
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a really interesting point. I would say first, as a scientist, we actually don't know. There's no data comparing men and women, especially postmenopausal women. We need to know how they respond differently because they do, but that doesn't necessarily mean we need to give them a different program, right? And so there's a lot left we don't know. Yeah. And we obviously know, generally speaking, men are stronger than women. In a general sense, but that doesn't mean women shouldn't do the same exercises, right? Mm-hmm. And then I think you bring up the quintessential point, right? Women think they're going to get huge. Now, some women genetically have more testosterone, but we still will never have enough or compared to a man. So you will never get huge unless you take testosterone.
Some men need that to get huge.
Yeah.
Most men need that to get huge.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
No, go for it.
Thinking about strength, though, so, go back 20 years ago, and 1 rep max strength was the domain of powerlifters, which was a fundamentally male sport at that point. But now you see a lot of not only female competitive powerlifters, but just women who want to get strong and who are valuing that sort of high-level absolute strength.
You CrossFit.
Yeah.
I don't know, but what special considerations or questions or concerns should that woman have in mind?
I mean, just talking off the top of my head, and I don't know why I have pregnancy on the brain, but there are things that happen, estrogen does cause joint laxicity. So you are more susceptible to, slip a joint or do some things. So some activities may need to transition, but it's like anything. If you train up to that point, there's no limitations in that sense for a female. I wouldn't say. I don't know what you guys would say.
Yeah.
I think what's cool about women in the strength world is that because women are sort of new to it, what we could do and what we could be is just no one knows yet. No one knows what the strong. I think men are pretty much tapped out. Yeah. Women, there's just this. We don't know. It's immense. It's so cool to think about what could happen. You look at sprinters over the last 100 years, men's times have started to sort of even out, and women's just keep going up. And I just think the more opportunity we give women to be what they could be, we don't know.
But look at the Olympics. Yeah, right? Exactly. There was more than 50% women.
Well, and I think that just comes, it's not because women are doing new, novel training, nutrition techniques. I think we're just doing stuff that guys have been doing for a really long time, like taking creatine, because we know it works. I had to get that in there, sorry.
Big creatine. She's been in their pocket for a long time.
Creo win.
Yeah, Creo win. But I think it just goes back to not being afraid of that sort of stuff, and it's misconceptions
and consistency, right? We've been at it longer, where we all know, right? If you train long enough, your set point changes, and so it's giving women the opportunity to train from when they're young until they're old.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. Right, but at the same time on the internet, you see these camps develop where you're a strength person, you're a muscle person, and I see a lot of people just sort of, swear off anything over 5 reps, basically. That's just bodybuilding. That's just vanity. My concern with a woman who's new to it is that she's going to be chasing for that, coming from a lifetime of not lifting, which is basically what I was until I started working here. I'm like, I don't want to lift weights.
Now he's a deadlift king.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, how much should a woman, do you think, focus on building her muscular base before throwing herself into strength necessarily? I mean, of course, it depends on her background.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you've actually had you've worked with a lot of populations, female populations who were more sedentary than not prior to. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's with everything. Like, you want to make sure you're not putting them in a situation where they're going to get injured, right? And everybody has different genetics. But it's like anything. Like, you don't want to go do deadlifts if you have a really weak core, right? So it's really, and I think if you take a female that's had a baby and never worked on their core, they're going to be more susceptible to injury. So I think it's taking a few extra precautions to tighten the center, right, before you like move on to some heavy things where you need that core really tight. But otherwise, it's the same. Like, you wouldn't throw a dude into, something if they don't have a strong base. So, yeah, definitely important if you take someone that's never done anything. And I think even more important, so I obviously work on a college campus, and you get these girls that like, I'm going to do 5-pound dumbbells, right? And so,
only if they're pink.
Yeah.
They have to be.
And you have to talk like But it's sad because they think they're like working out, right? But it's not to their advantage. So even if they think they've been training, making sure like they're doing it appropriately and actually doing a high enough stimulus, So it's a lot of lack of knowledge, but there is some really cool movements that are catching on. And obviously you guys do a good content, to show people how to start.
Yeah. So kind of just going a little bit more on that. You mentioned, are you getting enough of a stimulus? Are you, what bare minimum, if I'll back up a little bit, specific to women is our bone health. So let's take physique out for just a second, and then we'll kind of get into there and say what might we do something like, what are some cool training modalities that we could use, women specific, whether it's HIIT or type of lifting, but just health. So we've got bone that we're trying to strengthen. So what minimum, you have someone who's not very active or who's, looking at becoming more active, what would you recommend have them do?
We'll definitely start some strength training, right? And I think,
squats,
lower body. Yeah. And I think even, you see a lot of women with shoulder problems, right? Because if you think about how we sit all day, we're humped forward. And unless you're doing some sort, and unless you do some sort of back exercise, you are humped over all day.
Yeah.
And
so posture is a big concern.
Core and posture seem to be like two.
Yep. And then obviously bone is super important. You see so many women, even that are runners that are low, right? And so I always say like, do something that you couldn't do more than 8 times, right? And not like, I'm going to do a 5-pound dumbbell 8 times. Like really, like you couldn't do it 9. That's like a good kind of starting threshold.
Weight selection.
But does it necessarily have to involve an external load? Or, if you can do push-ups. 8 to 10 push-ups, is that a sufficient bone building stimulus?
It can be. And honestly, if you're starting with someone sedentary, so I'll take like your average 45-year-old female that doesn't know what they're doing. Like I'll have them do body weight squats so they know what they're doing. And that a lot of women don't know how to contract their ass, right? Like they like lean forward and only use their legs. So you can't throw them into like lunges or squats. So being able to sit down and stand up and really like squeeze your butt and get that base started first. And so I would still argue you would want to like pick up, 2-gallon milk jugs and like have some sort of stimulus as long as you have the technique, right? Because you do need that stimulus. So if you can only do 8 to 10 push-ups, that might be a good place to start for your upper body. But most of us need a little bit more.
Gluteal amnesia is just
robbing
a generation.
I was like, you just like the words you just said, like lit up Nick's brain. Like, yes, the butt. Like,
the butt is the answer, man.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, have you ever seen how many flat butts there are? And like, even like, I'll have to like switch my training. So you like, we just we overcompensate on our quads. And so really like, and getting that butt, that's where it's at.
For women in particular, you think?
Yeah, I was going to say, is there
Well, I would say part of that is that like boys get to, I don't know, when boys are boys, they like get taught how to do stuff and they get to play sports, they get to play football, and you get taught how to jump and you get taught how to land. And you just get to play more. And for little girls, we're sort of taught to sit around and color and like jump rope and you don't get the
jump
same.
rope is good.
I mean,
No, it's
Cinderella.
yeah,
and just be sort of
play
more
house and
right.
that sort
So
of thing.
I just think in general, girls just don't get to learn how their body works or in the best ways, the same way that boys do. And I think that's sort of causing this whole like, I mean, it's been generational since the freaking beginning of time of like how you can use your body and use it more
If it
effectively.
makes you feel any better, nobody's getting taught that, boys or girls now.
Yeah,
And that's
so
true.
Now we're all fucked.
physical activity. Well, and the hard part about that too is sometimes when you're working with individuals and trying to get them to start training more, and you give them cues that you would think anyone would get that, or okay, now squeeze your butt, or like tuck your hips under, and they stare at you and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and it's just awkward watching them. And let me help you.
Just a little-
See right here,
I poke
that,
in the butt.
So I do want to follow up on that, just because I know you've done a lot with high-intensity interval training. We actually did that in grad school quite a bit. So we talked a little bit just from a health perspective, some of the things that we could focus on, start with core, posture, those sorts of things. But now, let's be real. Like, I have...
Ain't nobody got time for
yeah,
that.
I was like, I need to get my ass into shape now. I've been training for a long time, and you have your ebbs and flows for weight and body fat. So, what are just some of the ways you can kind of kick up your workouts, and especially for women too, and we're busy and we're running the world.
Who
runs the world, girls? So yeah, I just want to hear kind of your thoughts on that, and your experience with all of it.
Well, of course, I'm biased.
That's okay. So I'm asking you because I know the answer. I want to hear it.
Yeah, it's funny because I was a distance runner in college, so I was like the cardio queen, right? And I now only do HIIT, like high intensity interval training. Most people know what it is, but the data is just ridiculous. Like, so obviously young people respond really well. I've done it we've finished a study and doing a study now in pre-bone marrow transplant patients. So we know that basically cardiovascular fitness is directly related to mortality. And so VO2 max, or cardiorespiratory fitness, is rapidly increased with HIIT. So we can increase it before treatment, and they have a much better survival rate.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, I've done it. The first big study I did at UNC was with overweight and obese individuals, and it was actually humorous now, not at the time, but really nobody in the department and at the IRB, which is like the research regulators, they were like, there's no fucking way you're going to do this. Like, they're too fragile.
They can't do it.
They can't
They'll
do
quit.
it. Yeah, and it's actually really interesting. So I've published a few papers on that. They love it. So they not only do they enjoy it, but they respond. And so 3 weeks of training, if you think about that population, and even anybody that's listening, like, we all get in those times where like we've taken time off, or we feel out of shape. It's like one of the best ways to like get your ass in gear. Literally, we know like after 2 sessions, you'll see a response. And so you allow yourself to feel a little bit better. We're now trying to do it in like knee osteoarthritis patients because they're limited in the amount of volume that they can do. And I'll even say like post-pregnancy, like obviously I didn't go like week 2, but I started walking and then started doing interval training because it was like I needed a way to get back quickly. And I needed a low volume. So I wouldn't, no overuse injuries. It was kind of like a fragile body time. And HIIT is the best time efficient way. Even, I'd put my kid to bed and I'd jump on the treadmill and you'd bang it out in 20 minutes, And so I will say, I'll admit it's hard to get started. But once you get started, it's the best thing that happens.
And how hard do I need to work on those intervals?
That's the thing. Yeah, you think about. I remember my dad when the Tabata stuff came out. I said, "Oh, we just wrote this article about this. Isn't this interesting?" And of course, he goes and tries to do Tabatas on this, resistance cycle at the gym, and was just croaking on the floor, and I think it turned him away from it for years. So yeah, how much does it have to suck for that person?
I mean, it does have to suck, but so I always like to say, and we've looked at some different protocols in the lab, and the best one we see is 1 minute on, 1 minute off. because you can do anything for a minute, right? But you also have to
rest is not enough.
But that's good because it's like you realize that the intensity of that minute is not going to be like a Tabata 10-second, right? So you're going to have to be able to make it through the minute and then rest a minute. And so usually we shoot for 10 sets, but sometimes you can't start that high, right? Maybe you do 6 or 7. And I always say, like, maybe you have to notch it down a little bit. The intensity isn't quite as high. It's just going to take a little bit longer to see the adaptations, right? So based on the science, we know you can get it in a couple sessions, but maybe you bump it down, right? And it maybe will take a few more. So
it's not a sprint mentality.
No, and it's not an exact science, which is so nice about it. We've actually done some like at-home programs, like say, hey, go do this on your own, which you can, like I said, you may not respond like right away, but you're going to respond. And we know you're going to respond so much quicker than if I told you to do like a couch to 5K program, right? So yeah, there's lots of variations to it.
And does it matter really what modality you choose or what size of kettlebell you?
Is it the size that matters? Please tell me no.
It depends.
Yes.
No, I think that's one of the nice things about HIIT is that mode doesn't really matter. However, if you're a runner, like run, right? And I find like since I was a runner, I don't get the same physiological and like body comp benefits if I bike because it's like quad dominant. I still like it, but so I think it just depends. Like even, I mean, we know this physiologically, if you can involve more muscles, it's going to be better. So like a rowing, right? Intervals. They suck, but they are good, right?
Yeah,
you can do them on the elliptical, but I mean, think about it. It's just harder to get your heart rate up.
So kind of look weird going like 85% on.
Yeah, but you should look next to you and be like, "Girl, you're doing it wrong." Like, better not watch that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, mode is dependent on person.
And what about nutrition around a workout like that? Like I know that you've spoken recently about fasted cardio versus fed cardio. Do people, if you're talking about high intensity versus more of, that 45 minute to an hour, 130 heart rate.
Less food, the better, right?
Yeah. As long as you're in the fat burning zone.
So, don't get your heart rate above 70%.
Yeah, such a disservice. And now I will say, like...
That's so nice.
Yeah. So girl. Yeah. Oh, they're just lying.
There might be better ways.
I mean, it's hard. Like, I can't have like a burrito before I go to HIIT. Like, you have to be leery of that. But so there's a lot of good data, and we've actually looked at this too, specifically in women, that fasting blunts your ability to utilize fat. And so if you look...
Did you hear that, women? Wait, can we repeat that one more time?
Now, fasting, though, let's define fasting, though. It's having not eaten in how long?
A few hours. Like, usually
so
we
then
define...
starting the morning with fasted HIIT is what you're talking about potentially.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say, like if it's somebody, like sometimes people do it like once every, few weeks, that's okay. But a lot of times people do it because I'm going to burn fat. I'm going to be like a fat burning machine, which you're just going to be miserable, right? Especially if you do it day in and day out, because then you're not fueled and your volume suffers. And then we did a really interesting study because it goes back to like, think about what a woman is going to grab. If you say, okay, don't go fasted, what are you going to grab? A banana or like, some pretzels. And so we really wanted to look at like, okay, what happens if you have, 90 calories of carbohydrate or 90 calories of protein before you train, something like high intensity interval training, resistance training, or aerobic. And we found that the 90 calories of protein, not only did it burn more calories after exercise, so it stimulated metabolism, it also stimulated a greater fat use. And so it matters what you have before, which is kind of nice because now it's saying, don't just eat anything, right? Let's pump you with some amino acids or some protein. And all we used was like a scoop of whey protein.
How long before a workout?
We did it for the study purposes like 30 minutes before.
And that's long enough for you to actually be able to use it as fuel to a certain degree?
Well, especially if it's liquid. So if you had like a chicken breast, it's going to take longer. But like a branched chain or amino acid or a whey is going to get there. I would even argue like if you can stomach a yogurt, for a whole food, like a Greek yogurt, that would digest pretty quickly too.
Maybe just give yourself a little bit more time
everybody's stomach is different,
right?
But so important. I mean, the same is true for men too. The data shows that fat oxidation or use is blunted when they fast. It's just more blunted for women. which is kind of interesting.
So this is only for interval training, though, or that person who's doing that 45 minutes
Everything.
steady state, they're
Yep.
also blunted.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so the workout's done. Do they need to slug the shake as well then, or is there any real case to say, yeah, you really should then, or case to say you really, there's nothing to begin by not doing it, right? Why would you not do it, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at two things. Definitely nothing to lose by doing it, right? But then also it goes beyond, like, maybe your goal isn't body comp or, whatever, fat oxidation, but damn, you're going to be sore, right? Like, if you move that window out too far, like, don't eat pretty close, like, we know that you'll have greater muscle damage or you won't recover as quickly. And then it goes back to, like, what do you want to feed? Do you need to feed protein before and after? Like, a lot of it goes with just fitting your macros into the best place around your workout. And sometimes you have all your intake squared away, but it's moving things around your workout just to be more advantageous.
She did say the M word in there.
Yeah,
The macros.
I heard it. Figure out your macros. Yeah. Well, so, and you did bring it up, eating before versus after. I know that comes up a lot. And sometimes for us too, I teach a class or I go work out and then I have to go do something. But I had a pretty good meal an hour before. Does that allow me to push out my window a little bit further and not think, oh, there go all my gains, or I'm not going to recover as quickly? So you can kind of play around with that a little bit.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, especially, like, I would argue if you had, like, your 90 calories of protein shake before, that's probably not going to get you there. But if you had, like, your whole meal, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
What if it was 3 hours earlier? Like, I had breakfast, then I worked out on my lunch break, and this breakfast still served me, basically.
I think it depends on how big your breakfast is and how hard your workout was, right? And so most of us on an everyday basis, we're not going to deplete our glycogen stores and, like, totally tear ourselves down. So you probably would be okay. But still, I would argue if you're eating breakfast and working out at lunch, like, you need to eat anyways, right?
Yeah.
So
I'd be hungry. I couldn't even make it that long. I'd be eating during my workout. Like,
That is the workout.
Walking to the fridge.
That's awesome.
So another thing that we hear a lot from not only women but men as well, but it seems like more from women, is talk about food sensitivities and all of this as well. And not only food sensitivities from the angle of I have food sensitivities, but there's also this food sensitivity backlash that also is happening. Like, you don't really know what your sensitivities are. Where does that fit into this? How high of a priority is it to figure out your sensitivities, if at all?
that's a really good question. So one bad thing is that it's a soft science. There's really not a lot of good data on it. But there is data that shows that women's guts are more susceptible to things like that, and it's more related to stress. And a lot of what we know about sensitivity is it comes from eating the same foods all the time, which we are notorious for doing. So I believe that we have sensitivities. However, the science behind it is a little soft, like how you might measure that. But I would encourage people, so you can get a fancy test, and I've actually done that before. And maybe there's something to be had if you have all the money in the world, right? But if you kind of stop and think and you ask a woman to like kind of look at the foods that she's eating, you can usually pick out what's causing the problem, or you start eliminating certain foods to figure out. And by causing the problem, like most women who are listening will know, like you get like gut gremlins. Sound like a good way to describe it.
A rumble.
No, it's not a rumble. It's like they're like, yeah, like hitting you from the inside, you know, and bloating. And so usually there's like one culprit. And it also comes to like a lot of our guts, our bacteria are really poor based on our diet and stuff. So I find, and what the science shows, we're doing a study on this now, is actually a probiotic can help kind of rebuild the gut and build up against some of those intolerances, or really prevent against leaky gut. So it kind of like keeps the gut stronger from some of those things causing the problems. So there's a lot of things you can do. I will say it's really hard because usually if you eat something at breakfast, it might be after lunch that you feel those gremlins. And so it's like starting like, well, was it what I had for lunch, or was it what I had for breakfast? And it's usually a couple meals before. So it's like a delayed onset response.
And what about for women who have dieted for competitions? maybe it's you mentioned eating the same thing, but also they might have taken out dairy, or they might have taken out a lot of carbs or grains from their diet because they're trying to cut back and lose any extra pound of body fat that they can. So what type of reactions do they see? But then can they reverse it so that I can eat dairy, I can eat gluten, I can eat?
Yeah, that was my question. Like, if you're sensitive, how do you, is it off limits? Do I never get to eat the broccoli again?
Ice cream.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think lactose intolerance is a little bit different, right? But yeah, so if you take it out of your diet and then reintroduce it, that sometimes causes problems. But really what they say to do, or kind of what you're supposed to do, is remove it for like a few months and then slowly reintroduce it. And same thing like for competitors, right? If you take grains totally out and you start to eat them, or you have your cheat meal, you're not going to feel good, right? Like if you think about grains, take a water molecule with it. So you're going to be bloated, you're going to be heavy, right? Like, so even slowly reintroducing on the backside is going to be helpful.
So you may not actually have an allergy to gluten.
Right.
It's just that your body doesn't know what
give me all the carbs.
Yeah. And so you're going to bloat from it.
Yeah. So that's a normal response.
I'm still trying to think though, if somebody's curious about this, what their options are to learn what their what their problems or what their challenges are. Like, is it go to the local naturopath who then might really want you to have a very specific plan based on their principles, or is it something online, or how do you figure out what your sensitivities are?
Well, and you said you did a test. How did you respond to that? I mean, did you follow what it said and you found it to be beneficial, or no?
I found it to be really beneficial. It was just kind of expensive. So even to this day, there's a company out there, I used Alcat, and they just send you a kit, you draw your blood and send it back, or have a lab mate draw your blood, or whoever, go to a clinic and draw your blood and send it in. And then they can measure different things. So I had to measure like main foods, and they can also measure like food colorings and ingredients, which is really interesting. And at the time, this was several years ago, because I was having a lot of gut problems, and turns out it was mostly related to stress. But then also like the same foods, like broccoli was on there, like really healthy foods that I ate every day. And so, I mean, you take them out and then reintroduce them. And even like little things, like I was sensitive to red 40, which is in everything, and so maybe I was consuming too much of that. And so it usually is related to that. And there's not anything like you can't ever have. It's just reintroducing them. And then I will
drink a glass of red 40 every night.
Note to self.
And sometimes you honestly don't realize it until you take it out, right? And so, and I will say, like, our guts go through different phases. Like, I don't know, Cassie, if you saw this, but I don't know what happens post-pregnancy, but I was like lactose intolerant, couldn't eat broccoli, like all my favorite foods, and I had to like phase it out, and then now it's fine. Like something happens to your gut, which makes sense if you think about physiologically what happens. So like even after competition, your gut changes. And so I would say there's different times in life based on what you eat and everything that your gut is continually changing.
It's interesting that you bring up broccoli, because I think when people are like, oh, I have GI problems, I'm going to get rid of dairy and gluten. Those are the two things.
Nobody'd ever get rid of broccoli.
No, but you could have, I know my sister, besides having celiac disease and actually being allergic to gluten, but eggs, iceberg lettuce.
That's what came up for me, too.
Yeah, things that you would think.
Lettuce.
Yeah, which is the biggest
just like
water
value
ever. But
what is there in there to irritate you? I don't understand.
It's interesting that we kind of have this mindset that it has to be this horrible thing that I'm eating, but in that you could take that out of your diet and still be miserable. So it may be worth, if you do phase out things and you don't notice any change, to kind of go for the
Right.
test.
If you're miserable, like you need to figure it out.
Yeah.
The other thing too, and I actually think BB.com has an article on this, but FODMAPs diet.
Yeah.
So helpful. Like actually that's what I did post-pregnancy. I just took all those foods out, and they're like really great foods, right?
Onions are on
yeah,
there, right?
like it's like things that are high in fructose and fiber, and it has for me it had a huge difference. And so like sometimes when I have like a flare up, or like when you're traveling out of your element, like you just kind of bring it back to the basics. And it's good to know those two tricks. And even the science on FODMAPs is increasing, and it's just some of how your body responds to it, which is another kind of good step that's cheap.
can also be easy though to start to feel like, oh no, I can't have anything.
Yeah, but it's
you
short
start
term.
self-diagnosing yourself,
Yeah.
and then we know how that always ends up. I have a tumor. I'm going to die, and I can't eat anything but water. So,
But I can poop.
according to WebMD.
Well, thanks for talking. I feel like we've covered a ton of good information.
I know.
This is a lot of
This is great.
places.
So where can we find more about you, our listeners? Where can they find out more about you?
No, I don't have a website or anything like
perfect.
that. But
Bumble.
Yeah, don't tell her husband
I'm
that.
happily married.
Yeah.
No, at my UNC, we have a homepage and I have contact information on there. I am on Twitter. I'm a tweeter.
Yeah.
So
What's your Twitter? Because you post science stuff. You do. Yeah. So what's your
It's
Twitter?
At A Smith-Ryan.
At A Smith-Ryan. Yeah. Always interesting. Yeah. So any up to date new novel research stuff, you'll get it hear it first or see it first on a nice tweet.
Do you ever start any Twitter flame wars with other scientists?
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Obviously, you don't go to the same part of Twitter either.
Those people, let me tell you, science and research take a long fucking time. So, I don't have time to do the data and, fight people on it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. We leave it to other people because there are some out there.
Yes,
that will
people
do it
love
for
that.
you.
That's not really my forte.
All right, until next time, thanks again, everybody.
Bye-bye.